Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Power of Affluence and Influence of Power panel event. My name is Susan Fikru, and I am part of the membership team here at IIRSM. Your speaker and host today is Tom Watling. Before I hand over to Tom, I'm just going to go through some few things first. To begin with, you should see to the right of your screen a toolbar with various options. You will be on mute for the duration of the webinar. Feel free to ask any questions or comments using the question area. If you need any support using the GoToWebinar, the I symbol will take you straight to the support site. Finally, this webinar is being recorded and a copy of the recording will be placed on the IIRSM YouTube channel. Okay, that's enough from me. Tom, I am going to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. So this is the first sort of session like this that I have been this side of the camera rather than just watching. So it's great to be able to host something like this as well as just watch them. And today we're joined by the same fantastic panel as we had before when we ran this session tail end of last year. So we have Kelly, Sarah and Ruth. I'll let them introduce themselves in a bit. So the premise of this session is we ran this session last year in a very different world, which I'm sure we're all used to hearing now. And it was the discussion around when we're managing risk so when we're managing risk in our organizations or our day-to-day lives, what do we find is more useful? Is it the power of how we influence people or how we influence people using power? So we had a very good sort of in the room discussion last year, and it's that we want this session as well to be as engaging as possible. I have a few questions that I'm going to ask the panelists, but I would really like if the vast majority of the questions came from you guys. So please do feel free to pop your questions in that chat box and we'll ask them to the panel. And where we settled last time was generally that whilst there is room for both of those elements, both influence and power when managing risk, and you do need both in certain circumstances, we found that it was much more successful if you're using influence as your main tool or technique in terms of whether that's building a culture or building out risk frameworks that are based around influencing people. We sort of discovered both within the panel and in the room that people found that was much more of a successful way forward. So firstly, I'm just going to ask the panel to introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and give sort of a brief opening question of considering how we were last year when we did this and the way the world has moved. What are the ways that sort of high level your organization has changed in its use of influence and power given where we are now? So if I'll start with Kelly, if you could introduce yourself. Hello.
Hi, so my name is Kelly. I am the health and safety coach for Hawkeye Innovations. We're part of the Sony Group, and we're probably most famous for tennis, cricket, VAR and GLT in football. We have about 1,000 members of staff based in around 15 different countries. We travel to about 120 different countries, which is somewhat interesting in this current climate. And I think for us, there's definitely been an awful lot more of the kind of power side of things with direction from local governments and kind of literally the requirements and the restrictions for getting into and out of various countries at the moment. But we're definitely still working with a lot of kind of influence. We're certainly finding that, for example, Bundesliga was one of the first football leagues to restart, and working really closely with them, we've then used the kind of Bundesliga as a case study, and then really use that to influence the rest of our clients with expectations, what works well, and how we kind of manage this COVID risk on top of everything else that we're doing. Succinct and to the point.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Thanks, Kelly. Sarah? Hello.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Tom. And Kelly has set the bar there in terms of So hello everybody, my name's Dr. Sarah Gordon. I'm CEO and co-founder of Satala Risk Management. So we're a risk management consultancy, and we get to work with all kinds of different organizations all over the world. And the exciting thing actually over the last year is that that's continued, and I think we're actually busier than ever. In part because we don't need to spend any time getting to places, and so therefore we can cram in more work as it were to those diaries. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'll let you guys judge. But I think with regards to sort of influence and power, I think we've seen a lot of organizations actually adopt power as a tool in a much heavier way over the last 6 months or so. And I think that's pretty normal when organizations go into a period of crisis, because let's face it, that's effectively what we are in, or certainly have been in over the last world. So people get much more directive in terms of what they're trying to get their organizations to do. And we've certainly seen that in a big way. But also conversely, I think the use of influence across the world has actually almost ratcheted up as well. So we see big influencers actually trying to change things across the world. So whether it's Black Lives Matter, for example, so we've seen all of that come through despite the world being in lockdown, and also this big swing with regards to raw materials coming from more responsible sources, climate change, etc. That hasn't disappeared. I think if anything, that's accelerated, and perhaps that's because people have had more access to online platforms or what have you. So this has definitely been a big part of our business over the last while. Just to piggyback off Kelly's football examples that she had there. So we've been doing lots of work with the Premier League, and that's a case there where also as well it's been really really interesting seeing where you have that balance of power and influence with regards to that football league opposed to some of the others as well. So really interesting. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So 2 football answers now. Ruth, are you going to make it a hat trick? Sorry, I couldn't resist.
So I'm Ruth Denyer. I am currently the Group Risk Director at ITV for a few more weeks, and then I am moving on to Netflix to look after safety there and work with their safety team. So that'll be very exciting. Same industry, but many different problems. The answer, I think it's interesting how people reacted to COVID, because I think they've reacted in 2 ways. And I think actually the power piece has become incredibly complicated because the rules are constantly changing and constantly different. And in an international business, even in a national business, in a local business, actually keeping ahead of what the rules should be and making them simple. At the very beginning, it was so much easier because you could have that power. You could have 3 simple rules that everybody needed to follow. One of the words we're seeing a lot is, am I allowed? And people asking us if they're allowed. And I think that reflects back to this idea that there's all these rules that nobody actually knows what they're supposed to be doing. And so one of the things we're spending a lot of time doing is trying to unpick that allowed and go back to basic principles of, is it a good idea as well? So even if you're allowed to do it, it's still a good idea. I also think I was just trying to scaled influence really working. So we've pulled together as an industry and we've really worked together to influence guidelines, requirements, what we're able to do in our sector. And I think lots of sectors have really done that. And you've seen this kind of, if you get together, you can really scale your influence and you can start to actually influence how things happen. So that's been different. I've never seen things move that fast. I've never seen us able to collaborate at such pace and actually really share a direction. And it's because we've all been absolutely in it together. And I think for me, that's been much more about influence than power, because it's been about how do we use our scale together and influence the course of events that are happening to us. So that would be my answer.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And well, in fact, we have a question from the audience from Katie Bale. Thank you very much. So I'll ask the question and then I think so, Sarah, I think this will be firstly for you and then we'll see if anyone else would like to come in. Sarah said that businesses had moved towards the use of power to tell people what to do during COVID. Do you feel that employees want to be told what to do in these uncertain times? There's some comfort in removing the uncertainty. And I guess, yeah, so Sarah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in times when there's huge uncertainty, people crave an element of certainty. And speaking as a British citizen, I would love to be told clearly and concisely what it is I'm allowed or not allowed to do. I confess that over the last 48 hours, I have moved from the northeast of Scotland, where I actually went fairly early on in COVID. So I'm one of those people that invested in a camper van and disappeared out of London to my family's farm. And I've built a little hut, which is off-grid, which has been my little safe bubble. And I've come down to big, scary London. And I have to say, it is terrifying being here because there are lots of people not wearing masks, not seemingly adhering to what you think the rules might be, but then you realise you don't necessarily know what the rules are. And I think this comes down to a really interesting thing that Ruth said, which is, what are we allowed to do? And yes, we need to know what we're allowed to do, but as well, it's, well, hang on a second, I'm responsible for my own safety. What should I be doing? So just because the government says you don't need to wear a mask, if you think it's a good idea to wear a mask, wear a mask. No one's telling you not to wear one. And so I think that that's something there in terms of, as individuals, we crave that element of certainty, but also we need that element of freedom to be able to make up our own minds within it as well. And at the moment, we're perhaps not necessarily getting that in some countries to the extent that we might desire, being polite.
Yes, thank you. Would anyone else?
So I've certainly found it. So we kind of our first big event outside of the UK was the Cincinnati and the US Open, which were both done in Washington. That is usually a wonderful time for our guys to go out and have a great experience in America. And this year was very, very different for them. And what we did was we actually ended up kind of creating a kind of set of behavioral expectations for them, which became very difficult during the kind of uptick in the Black Lives Matter protests again. And we suddenly had a wonderful group of young people who wanted to go out and express how they felt about what was going on and what they were seeing. And unfortunately, we had to make that really awful, from a personal perspective, I was like, go, wave a flag for me, absolutely. But from a business perspective, we were there on invitation from with permission from the White House. And we absolutely could not, the reputational damage that potentially would have caused, never mind the potential cost to kind of lives and the damage to that if somebody unfortunately were to catch COVID. At that point, we kind of had to say, we're really sorry, we can't allow you to go. However, here's a load of other things that you can do instead, and kind of guided them towards a slightly different way of kind of being able to express themselves. And we found that kind of generally speaking, our guys are now really into kind of the rhythm of what is expected on site, what's expected when they're off site. And we're actually finding that they become quite anxious when they're going to countries now that are slightly freer, that aren't as restrictive. So, this is obviously a few weeks ago. Italy's changed Italy has changed somewhat again. But having gone to America, where it was very much, you're on pretty much lockdown, you go to the venue, you go to your hotel, have fun in the hotel, but that's kind of it. And then they go to Italy and it's go and get a haircut, go and have, pasta and gelato in, a restaurant, go and have fun. And they found it really strange. And there was lots of kind of, well, again, it's that, am I allowed? Am I allowed to go to dinner? Am I allowed to go and get my haircut? Am I allowed to do this? And now they're starting to kind of get to the point where it's like, actually, if we're following the same principles, it doesn't matter where we are. So we're staying away from other people, we're wearing masks where we need to, we're washing our hands. And as long as we're kind of sticking to those principles, our guys are certainly feeling a little bit more comfortable with kind of their own personal views and their own kind of influence on their own teams.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. So sort of a supplementary question for you, Ruth, has come in, and it's why do you think that it's now that is the time that the industry has pulled together and been able to do it at such pace?
I think we've got the same problem at the same time. I think everybody, at any point in time, we've all got priority lists, haven't we? We're all focusing on different things, and there's about 30 new regulations that you need to get to speed with, or you all have your own business problem. There's very few, certainly since I've been working in safety for 20 years, there's never been a moment in time, even like when the CDM regs were new, it wasn't like COVID where everybody's got the same problem. That is flooring your business, and you need to get it sorted, and you need to get it sorted fast because it's really, really having an impact. And it's palpable, isn't it? That pressure and that drive to get something done. And also, to be honest, you've got people listening who need to get this sorted. So you've got the very senior people, you've got the government. They do need to work away how you're going to work around this. And so if you step forward with the solutions, I think people are going, thank God someone's stepping forward with the solutions. And yeah. I guess it's just momentum, isn't it? It's all in it together. It felt like that anyway, and it still does.
Yeah, fantastic. So we've got another question from an attendee. It's Norman Gridley. Thank you very much. Can the panelists comment on the diminished confidence in national governments resulting from uncertain recommendations related to control of COVID? He said that this has happened in the US in a big way, but I think sort of linking that back to sort of power and influence, how has that affected how we can influence within our organisations? I mean, I know personally, I've been supporting a national charity for the last few months, and I was on calls today where people are saying, oh, I know that's the government advice, but I don't want to follow that. So as in they want to go above and beyond, and think that we as an organisation should be going far above and beyond. So what's can you comment on that? Let's start with Ruth this time.
Trying to be diplomatic in the most effective way possible. I think that, and it's well known psychologically, that clear messages land. People understand clear messaging, and everybody is confused by what the new messaging is, and the more complex it gets, the more confusing it is. And it feels like what people want is simplicity, really, that you can really understand why you're being asked to do what you're being asked to do, and the different tiers, the different levels, all the different things that are going on. And across the states, you've got it state by state, you've got it here, you've got it city by city. I just don't think people can really get under the skin of what it is you're being asked to do, where and why, and maybe that explanation is far too complex, so you need to boil it down to something very simple. And it feels like behind all that, you've ended up with this place where people are like, I'm not really sure why are you asking us to do this because of COVID, or is there another reason? And then you can build in so many theories that I guess complexity has caused people to distrust, because you can have, the more complex it gets, the more questions you have about why it's that complex. That would be my thought on it. Can I just say, it's been very useful for our relationship with the lawyers who support us in health and safety, because they've been brilliant at helping us with all our weird and wonderful questions around what are we legally actually allowed to do now in this place.
Kelly, what would you say on that?
I agree with Ruth. I think the more complex it has become, like in March, it was really very difficult, very easy rather. You stay at home, you save lives, and that was kind of the message, and we very much were all in it together. Now, my family are up in Doncaster. They're in tier 3 as of Saturday morning, and we, and that has such a ramification for what they're allowed to do versus what I'm allowed to do down here, and it becomes very it's so complex. And I think the other difficulty we have is that the people that are leading us aren't following what they're telling us to do. There are numerous examples that I'm not going to go into because they make me rage somewhat. But if you, and we discussed this the last time, if you're not living and breathing what you're influencing and telling other people to do, you cannot expect anybody else to do it. And that becomes really difficult when you see people blatantly breaking the rules. Our leader for public health not wearing a mask with somebody else in a car, or not washing their hands, or standing too close to somebody. It's the basic things that have been drilled into us for eight months now. 8 months, and they're still not doing it. And so no wonder people have diminished confidence. I think the attitude that we've taken is we do what the government tells us to do because that's necessary and that's essential, and we could potentially get fined and there's legal ramifications for that. But what we're doing is we've created our own, we've kind of created our own principles, and as long as we're working to those and as long as they fit, with what's required from those countries. We're doing, you know, we've created our own set of rules in order to make it happen.
So yeah, it sounds to me like although obviously where we've had the directives, let's say, or the government guidance or the government regulations that have come in, and it's been within reason simple enough just to regurgitate them into what we need to do within our organizations. As you said, where our teams are seeing other people outside of our organizations not living and breathing that, it seems to me like that power is then not good enough. We then have to not only have that power side, but then put the influence on top. Sarah, sorry, your hand was up. What would you say?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think this is something where when somebody who is in a position of authority doesn't actually follow their own rules, not only does that then completely eradicate any influence they had, but it also erodes their power that they have over us as well. Because then people don't trust them, they don't believe in them, and they say, well, I mean, I don't know, what do we think's best? And then you end up with kind of lots of little factions, as it were, building up, and all of us kind of going, okay, well, that's what the government's saying, but what should we actually be doing? And, you know, Ruth, I think it's great hearing that the lawyers have been so useful, because actually we need these people to say, okay, well, today, this is what it means. Tomorrow, we have no idea what it means from a kind of a legal perspective. And I think the UK is actually a really good case study in terms of when, to be honest, we have no idea what's going on. Now, if you go to somewhere like, and I happen to know that Norm Gridley, who sent that question in, is currently sitting in Chile. Now, in Chile, they've been in lockdown forever. So it's actually really kind of clear cut in terms of what's going on. We've got lots of team members who are based in Australia. And in Australia, I mean, you can count the number of cases they have in the entire country on one hand. And they say, oh, well, it's dreadful. You know, we've had another 2 cases today. And we're sitting there going, well, the university around the corner has just had 750 or whatever the case is. Now, it is not a competition, absolutely not a competition. Right. And I think that then comes down to context. And then if we bring this back into a risk management world, and we can say, okay, well, actually, what has changed since March? Has COVID changed? I mean, it might have mutated, but actually it's still there. Has our ability to combat COVID in a proactive way changed? Nope. We don't have any vaccination or anything like that. We might be better at testing for it, etc., but very little really has changed there. And so therefore it's really interesting from a kind of academic sense, observing what is going on, to take all the emotion out of it and thinking, help, we're all still in this, to say, actually, in terms of the official response, as it were, or method to treating COVID now, nothing's actually changed in the background context. What has changed is the economy and the pressure on the government to actually allow things to stay more open than perhaps where we were back in March, which in turn is perhaps then sparking a slightly different or more fragmented approach. So I think this is fascinating from a risk management case study perspective, where we say, okay, what is actually driving these different approaches to COVID, and why are decision makers making those decisions at the moment? Because it's incredibly difficult for them, and which in turn makes it more difficult for everybody else.
Yeah, we've had a comment from Chris saying he's pleased to see that the panel are talking about adults acting responsibly as well. So it's not just, are we allowed to do it? It's, is it a wise or responsible thing to do? Saying that there is, what's Chris said? He said, sort of similarly within the health and safety field, more specifically, where it's not only organisations that have a responsibility to look after people, everyone has a legal responsibility to look after themselves as well. So it's how that ties into what we're dealing with now, and very much just about acting responsibly in and of yourself can help control COVID as well. We've got a...
Tom, can I just say something? I'm waving. I'm waving. All I was going to say was, actually, I think that's really important. I think one of the things we're really trying to focus on is how we give people the knowledge to make the decision themselves about what's the right course. And the problem at the moment is you only have to look at the testing world to get entirely confused about what is available, what is good, what is bad. Look at all the research on masks that finally kind of settled upon in the summer what they thought was good, and it started off much earlier on that people going, yeah, we should be using. And so I think part of it and part of what we can do is it's that context piece that we can help give people the information that means they can make good decisions. Yes, we can inform them what they are allowed to do, and then we can build the context for them and actually help support that. How do you make good decisions? Because you can find a story out there supporting anything you want it to, and it's how do you sift through all of that and actually start to understand it. And I know certainly our profession, everybody's been trying to do that, and we've all probably learned more than we ever thought we'd need to know about this kind of disease. But it's how we then give that in simple messaging to the people that we work with, to say, this is what we've learned, here's some information for you guys to make good decisions yourselves.
Yeah. And that actually, so I'm sorry I couldn't see you waving. I had a question in front of your face, but I've moved it now, so it's not going to be in front of your face anymore. I'm so sorry. So actually, your answer there leads very nicely on into a question from Graham Parker. So it's with the many different requirements, is the best sort of influencing tool that we have now to allow employees to dynamically assess the needs of the environment that they're finding themselves in, obviously within the framework of government guidance. Kelly, what are your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Graham. I think it's slightly difficult to just kind of go, here's a framework, off you pop at the moment, because when they're not just responsible for themselves, they are then they're always responsible for the people around them, but that's even more keenly felt by people with underlying conditions, with people who are living at home, living with somebody who's more vulnerable or higher risk. And it's about protecting them as well as the people that we are working with. So for me, I feel that, you know what? I've gone completely blank. Don't know how I feel about it anymore. No, I think that I think the difficulty is that, Sarah, Ruth and I, the conversation that we had last time was very much around, we use our influence, we absolutely use our influence. And now, like, I'm finding it quite, from a personal perspective, I'm finding it quite difficult to then kind of swap the way that I've worked for so long to actually say, no, this is the way that you need to do this. Actually, production floor, no, you can't have everybody on site all the time. I know that makes your life easier operationally, but this is not the world that we're living in now. So yeah, it is challenging. It is challenging. Of course, it's challenging.
I think, yeah, we found sort of in terms of the dynamic risk assessment side, where you have lots of variables, but the context that they're within is fairly consistent, you can apply that dynamic risk assessment principle. I think not only do we have lots of variables, but we're seeing the context that we're working within shift on a daily and weekly basis. So that's where we've been struggling more with the dynamic. And again, working with an organisation that's very used to dynamic risk assessment in delivering services to vulnerable people. Like it's not new to them, but it's just something that we've struggled with as well. And I think that we're still finding the balance, and it's taking quite a bit of hand-holding to find the balance between when dynamic assessments in terms of COVID are appropriate and when we have to be slightly more rigid. Ruth, oh, sorry, Sarah, go on. What are your thoughts?
No, sorry, Ruth, for queue jumping you there. I think this also comes in a way back to kind of the whole risk appetite and tolerance concept. So actually, you can say kind of using risk tolerance or kind of that capacity level of actually here's and I'm straying into Brexit here. I know we've managed to go quite a long time without mentioning that word, but this is a case where actually where are the hard stops type thing, and that almost goes hand in hand with Kelly's principles as well of saying actually, well, look, here are some boundaries, but actually your context better than anybody else. You make your mind up with regards to what is the most sensible thing to do in this situation. And that's the case there where, so coming into the office, so I live in the middle of London, and I'm here in an office, and in the next door office, there are a whole load of people who have travelled into the centre of London using public transport and everything. I personally would feel very uncomfortable doing that at the moment. Now I can walk to my office. And so this then comes down to your personal appetite for taking risk, and also what do you think is the most sensible thing for you, and do you have people that need to be shielded and all of that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, I think the dynamic risk assessment based on how your context is changing, very important, but we do need some hard boundaries around the edge to help us with that. And where we're getting just confusion coming from the government, here we go, we're getting more and more honest here. Actually, we can get more concrete boundaries, as it were, from our own organisations, because that's often where we go to try and get that guidance from.
Yeah. Ruth, did you have any?
I guess my thought was, and there's kind of three basic things, aren't there? You stay 2 meters away, you have good hand hygiene, and you don't come in if you've got any of the symptoms. That's kind of, if you're working within that space, actually you can be pretty dynamic. Once you get past any of those things, you need to start thinking a lot more about what you're doing. And what I think has been really interesting is the 2 meter thing, because it's a simple rule, isn't it? It's a simple rule, and you could have power in it. But my God, does everybody because naturally humans just get closer, and during the day or during that, you just see them get closer and closer. And so what you find, how do you get people to actually stay? And you can influence all you like, and people can get it. They actually get why they need to, and they understand it. But it's like they've got magnets and they're pulling them together. And so at some point in time, you end up with this need for more control than you really like, because I don't like to be controlling. But actually, if you really do want to keep people apart, you can look at technology, you can look at people telling them. But I think it's been really interesting for me in terms of how do you make a rule that everybody buys into and believes, but just human nature is going the other way. And how do you get? I think that's absolutely fascinating. As a study, like you said, it's going to be really interesting. But for now, if that genuinely is one of our real controls that we can put in place and we can make sure helps everybody work, how do we actually? And people buy into it, but they just don't naturally do it.
Because we're social creatures. Like, it's not like babies die from not being held. Like, we are not meant to be in isolation from each other. We are meant to be physically close to each other. But we found it, like I found it watching the football, like the development of from right at the beginning, where it was everybody very respectfully waved, from 2 meters away, and they did this very respectful, 2 meters away from each other, kind of goal celebrations and stuff like that. And you put Match of the Day on now, and they are all over each other again. And that's because they're going through a really strict testing regime, so they kind of they know that is there. But for a lot of people who are seeing that, they're seeing that football's back to normal, they're seeing tennis back to normal, and and then they're still, and yet you're still being told that you need to stay away from each other and you can't be close with each other. And it's those hard borders, and then it's the additional, it's how we work within those. We certainly find that there are places where we cannot social distance, we can't there isn't enough room to physically do it. So what we've then done is put physical barriers in between each other, between people, or enforced mask wearing, alongside testing regimes that give people the confidence. And then there are other people who, it doesn't matter what we put in, it doesn't matter how much guidance, how much support, how much we're all in this together and we're all working on the same principles. There are some people that just won't do it because there is this attitude of potentially, I'm young, I'm not at risk, if I get it, it's not a big deal. And then there are others who are absolutely the other side of, I am terrified of this, I don't want it, so are being considerably more cautious than some of the others. And it's how you navigate that as well, especially within the same team sometimes, and how you can make one person comfortable and one person really uncomfortable.
Yeah. And if that person's in a position of authority or leadership, kind of looping back to what we were saying before, that just that their inability to adhere then influences those around them. And it actually comes back to a point that I missed earlier. Apologies, Katie Pell. And it was, Katie had said that she'd seen an incident where a CEO was caught not using the one-way system in an office complex, and they went on to deliver a public apology to the staff at the next company webinar and thank the individual who challenged them. So that's an example there of if you see your CEO or someone in authority not following it, well, are you going to follow it? But you can win that back with the public apology, and I think that's the what may have been lacking in the outside of work spheres, let's say, to be as apolitical as possible.
Oh, but that was
the fact
wonderful.
that people were just saying, if we have an apology, then we get it and we move on, and then you get some credibility back. And I think that in terms of using that, and that is a fantastic sort of example of the influence that leaders can have around an organisation through their actions and through their words. Obviously, it says I may be experiencing connection difficulties. Can people hear me?
I can still hear you.
Okay, fantastic. That's fine. The next question that I have from someone in the room, which again, this might be my ignorance or naivety. It's a question for Kelly, and it's how much, this may be nothing to do with it, and it may be sarcastic. So how much do you think the top tennis players are exerting influence versus power regarding Hawkeye, e.g. French Open?
Oh goodness.
I'll let you decide how and whether you want to answer that.
I think I honestly haven't. I would love to have sat and watched the French Open, but I haven't watched any tennis or any sport over the past few months. I've been somewhat busy. But the example that Ruth was talking about, kind of the broadcast industry and how they're kind of teaming together and influencing, and we're kind of, you are seeing that through sports personalities as well. You saw that through, the US Open and the amount of big names that went, it's not safe enough, I'm not coming. And then the big names that then really influenced the way that the US Open worked. And they did something very similar with the French Open. And it's, but from a technology perspective, I'm completely Switzerland. I'm not saying anything about the technology side of things.
Fantastic. I'm just going to move on to a question linked to influence and power, but also we're seeing a lot in the industry about well-being, employee well-being at the moment, with lots of people working remotely and not necessarily having the connections or bonds or support that they might have had in the workplace before. So with that in mind, with the industry-wide renewed focus on worker well-being due to the COVID complexities, how are you or your organisations applying either power or influence in supporting your teams? We've heard of some sort of enforced fun and enforced Zoom quizzes and stuff to lighten moods and things like that. But so obviously that may be a poor example, but in terms of looking after worker well-being, how are you guys, or are there any examples, or whether you're using them yourselves or that you've heard of that you could share? Sarah, let's start with you.
Thanks for that. So enforced fun, that sounds quite powerful. So I mean, I think this is something here where so we have a community of individuals based around the world. So we've got approximately 80 associates based in as many different countries as you can think of. And what we started doing actually at the beginning of COVID was having just a weekly community call. And we spend the first half an hour just checking in with people around the world, and everybody has to share something that's made them smile, a bit of power in there. And then somebody gets the floor for 10-15 minutes to share something that they've been doing or they're up to or they're interested in. And that could be anything from the research project that they've been working on through to one of our individuals. He shared some insights into yoga and meditation. And it was awesome because we had basically everybody from around the world meditating, which was great. And I think that that's something there where when we first started doing it, I was like, okay, this is just to say to everyone, look, we're here to support you. And every so often I think people still want it, but the emails and the messages that we get saying, please keep these going. And it's very informal. People kind of tap in and out, so they just come every few weeks. It's been amazing to kind of see, I think almost in a similar way to what Ruth was saying about the industry, your industry pulling together. This is actually lots of individuals who are independent consultants actually saying, yeah, I'm here for you, I'm with you as well. And I think that's been massive because that loneliness that COVID has forced on a lot of us is massive. And even if you're living at home with a massive family, so you've got a big bubble of people to talk to, actually in your working life, it is incredibly lonely because it's very rare that you're going to have somebody at home who truly understands what you're actually doing at work. So I think that there is that I'm here for you bit that's really important from a wellness perspective. Is there more stuff that we could be doing? Absolutely. And actually, the gentleman who gave us the insight to yoga and meditation, he actually started working with us on the 9th of March this year. So he gleefully tells everybody that he started working, he was in the office for a few days, and then bang, that was it. That's something there where we have a team member who's a core part of the team, but actually we've never really spent much physical time together. And I think that's been really interesting to observe. Okay, how do you create that relationship with an individual? And it's hard because you don't get those normal body language tweaks if somebody's not feeling great today, because everything is in this 2D world. So I think the key learning there is you got to talk. You just pick up the phone and speak to people, or different messaging or something like that. Just over communicate is the only way to do it. I will shut up now and let somebody else take it.
Yeah, I'm very proud of what we've done from a wellbeing perspective. So we were doing kind of right at the beginning, we were doing kind of weekly we call them Hawkeye at Home series, which was kind of, here's some ideas for how to keep your kids, entertained and, and try not to want to strangle them too much. Here's a whole load of ideas of going out without going out. Here's a list of theatres, international theatres that are sharing their stuff for free. And here's all of these wonderful museums that you can visit virtually and stuff like that, to really kind of try and get our people kind of re-engaged with the world a little bit. We've certainly found, so we signed up with a mental health app called Unmind kind of this time last year. And we suddenly found that over the course of kind of lockdown, and we suddenly went from we increased our membership, our sign up for Unmind by about kind of an additional 10% of our population signed up for it. And it's that really difficult thing of, if I'm not in a good place, I go quiet and I sit down and I just I fire through. And that's really easy for somebody to pick up if we're in the office together. It's usually now it's taking a couple of days for somebody to turn around and go, oh, you've been really quiet, what's going on with you? But it's creating that culture of really being able to say, if you're not having a good time, reach out. We have tea sessions, we have we have like tea breaks where we some of us will get into a Zoom call or something like that to kind of chat about anything but work. And one of the companies that we work very closely with do a Friday kind of 4 o'clock, everybody get on a Zoom chat, everybody have a beer, and we do not talk about work. And that's really lovely, because that's definitely an element that we're all missing, is just that interaction with each other now.
Yeah. Ruth?
I work in an organisation that obviously does a lot around this kind of well-being whilst everybody's working remotely, and that all the good things and everything that's happening, and helping people manage remotely and be part of a remote business, and kind of to put another lens on it, I think one of the challenges is it's shit for some people, and actually we want to solve it and we can't change it, and you sit there and you go, do you know what? If you're stuck in your house by yourself all day working, you're in another lockdown area, it's pretty crap for you. And I think there's a bit that we all want to make it better, and we want to focus on well-being. We want it to be, what can we do to make this more positive? And we can wrap it all up but we're in a global pandemic where people are locked in their homes working from home every day. And that's, however much we wrap that and we make it shiny, it's still a pretty horrible. And I feel like sometimes we don't admit to that as people and as an organisation, that actually it is really hard for some people, and we can do as much as we can, and we can be there, and I can phone you up. But actually, if you're dealing with people like that, you feel pretty useless actually yourself, because you can't make it better. You can be on the phone, but actually if you're feeling awful about your life, and there isn't any things you leverage you can pull anymore, because you're like, oh my gosh, really. And I feel like everybody started off and there was lots of things going on, lots of positive stuff, and there was all the quizzes and this, that and the other, and you're 6 to 8 months in and you're like, wow, and I can feel it. And the other side of that, I can feel within the people who've been dealing with this professionally, people we were just talking about, I think we talked about it before we got on this session, people are hitting a wall. And
Yeah.
that wall, how do we get our own teams who do this over that and carrying on with the momentum and pace that's needed to get through the next 6 months? Because it does feel, I think that an analogy of the wall is such a good one, because I can see people coming up against it going, oh my God, 6 more. And then you go, and working from home as well.
Yeah.
So not
And
to
the
be
clock's going back this Sunday.
exactly. And I think organisations can do everything, and our organisation has done lots and lots and lots and is really trying to help people. But there is a bit where you have to go, nobody would choose to live life like this, I don't think, or very few people, I would imagine, would. She says we're about to go into half term again.
But I think you're right. I think the important thing is acknowledging that, do you know what? As much as, you know, there is something to be said for giving somebody else a hug at the end of a conversation, you know, giving somebody else a hug and saying, I know it's rubbish, but it will get better, and not being able to do that is really difficult. But it is. I certainly feel like I've hit that wall really hard over the past couple of weeks. And I think the difficulty is it kind of feels relentless. It feels like we have to have, you know, from a professional perspective, we have to be on top of it. We have to, you know, the second that, you know, we get that alert saying that Boris is making another, you know, another announcement at 4 o'clock, and you get it at 5 to 4, and it's like, what do I do? And then you sit there and it's like, so what does this mean now? And then you get, you know, you get messages at 8:30 at night saying Italy is just about to implement a curfew, and I've now got to drop everything else and manage that. And it's mentally and physically exhausting doing the job that we are doing now, without then having all of the other stuff that everybody else is dealing with as well, which is how we're feeling about being stuck at home, not being able to get out much. I can't remember the last time I had a lunch break. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's, and that wasn't normal when we were in the office. We would go and have a break. We would go and get time, and it's just not happening as much. But we kind of have to take our own advice a little bit and go, yeah, it's shit. But at some point, if we don't start looking after ourselves, if we don't do that self-care bit that we're telling everybody else to do, we will either mentally or physically stop. You know, we'll either become ill or something mental will happen, and our bodies and our brains will force us to stop and take the rest that we're not taking now.
Yeah. We've been pushing that message that time that you use to look after yourself, i.e. not that we're telling you to do something, or not that so it's about empowering people to look after themselves. That's an investment of time rather than time being spent. So it is investing you to be able to, even if you're looking at it not in a selfish way about looking after yourself as a person, from a business perspective, it actually makes sense for us as a business for you to invest time in looking after yourself now, so that we don't get burnout later down the line. Now, that's obviously not the only reason that we look after well-being, but there's cases, there's sort of several reasons that you want to make sure that people are looking after themselves. And in terms of the influence side, we as a sort of I sit within the people services team, and we've been trying to influence operational managers. And it's not just about, oh well, there's this webinar, or well, there's this tool that you can use for your mental well-being. It's about influencing line management and organizational structure to adjust their expectations of people, to understand what's going on. So it's not just about following here's the one-to-one, here's what you should have achieved, have you achieved it, X, Y, Z. It's adjusting that throughout. It's not just a layer of nice well-being stuff that you stick on top of it. It's about sort of actually looking throughout the organization and how we operate day to day. And that's what we've been looking at as well. And that's much more on the influence side, because it's about influencing managers to adopt that position rather than a formal policy of this is what we're going to do, because there's so many variables that it changes with everyone. Yeah. Fantastic. Right, so next question that we've got comes from Megan Langtip, and it's linking back to travel, as we discussed before. So Megan is saying that some organisations have continued to travel throughout the pandemic, and where we were talking about people's personal risk appetites, sometimes people's personal risk appetite in terms of travel changes on a daily or weekly basis. And there's lots of other influences, things like job security, things like being able to deliver a project on time, things like, am I going to have to quarantine when I come home? How's that going to impact my personal life, etc. So what are sort of the panel's thoughts on people's changing risk appetite, especially in terms of people? I think it's people's personal changing risk appetite in terms of specifically travel, has been asked here. So who mentioned travel first? Sarah, I think. So if we start with Sarah on the travel one. Sorry, Sarah, did I pounce on you?
I'm sure Kelly mentioned travel before me. I'm sure she did.
Oh, sorry, Kelly.
On you go, Kelly. You go for it, and then I'll come back. Okay, I'll go first, and then I'll pass the ball to you. So in terms of travel and people's changing risk appetites and personal appetite, I think this is something where, actually following on from well-being and how we feel in ourselves, it doesn't matter who you are, your emotions will be doing this, I suspect, at the moment. So on one moment you'll be going, I have to get out of here, and the next moment you'll be like, no, it's okay, I've got things sorted, I know what's going on. Depending on where you are in the world, yes, half term is this thing, and we're all probably thinking, what on earth do I do with little people? If I can't go, how do I waste all that time? Or how do I spend that time? There are only so many pumpkins I can carve. Okay, so what do? We're going to have the world's most amazing Halloween Zoom party. Effectively, that is what is going to happen over the next week, etc. And so I think that a lot of it comes down to how are we feeling, what's our own personal well-being going on at the moment, coupled with different lockdown restrictions in different parts of the world. So one of the things that we had going on was, so just before we went into lockdown here in the UK, I was in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I think we can all agree that would have been a very exciting place to get stuck. Anyway, needless to say, I did manage to get back into Europe before everything went into lockdown. However, one of my colleagues wasn't as lucky with his travel plans, because South Africa, which is where lots of the African flights go through, Johannesburg effectively went into lockdown earlier than when their government had said it would happen. And so I think that this is a case here where what we found was that everybody thought they knew what was going on, but then suddenly the rules changed. And that's one thing when you're in somewhere that you feel quite safe and you've got control of what's going on. It's a different thing when a team member gets stuck somewhere where you have no control over what's going on. And actually the big risk is not COVID. Actually, you've got things like Ebola and the plague and stuff like that from a disease perspective, but then also the big risk really is around security and things like that. What on earth do you do? Because all of those other controls have gone out the window. So I think that's the case there. With regards to travel, if I just bring this, Ben, back into power and influence, something that the UK has differed compared to other countries on is we have not shut our airports. And most of the COVID that we're suffering came into our country via those airports. Most of the other countries in the world shut down air travel, but for whatever reason, we decided not to do that. And I think that retrospectively, if we'd said, you know what, we live on an island, let's embrace that fact. So therefore, we are naturally, geographically isolated from everything else. Let's use that. I wonder, with hindsight, which is always dangerous, if we'd be in a different position now. Now you've got pros and cons, obviously behind there, you've got the airline industry, etc. If we'd actually all stayed at home over the summer and gone on holiday within our own country, that would have helped the economy, and also perhaps it would have suppressed some of the problems that we've got with COVID now. I'm not saying that that's the way to go or anything, but I think that maybe does feed into the travel question and the difference of where the government did have the power to stop people coming in and out of our country in the same way that they did do over the summer, but decided not to use it and instead went for an influence tactic, perhaps. Did it work or didn't it work? I think that's kind of interesting. I will now pass to the lovely Kelly.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I just to carry on your point, Sarah, I look at New Zealand, and I know it's very different. I know population-wise and stuff like that, it's very, very different. But the success that they have had with managing COVID, they shut it down. It didn't matter if you were local or visiting, you were there, they supported, and you know, that is a perfect example of great leadership with great influence and exerting her power in absolutely the right way. I just love her. But anyway, so we travel a lot. There is not a huge amount of sport other than kind of the rugby that's coming back, and you know, a bit of cricket over summer, and the football. There's not a huge amount of sport that happens within the UK, especially over our winter season. So we have to travel. You know, it's part of our role as, you know, sports officiating. We have to travel. And what we did was, right at the beginning, we started to, you know, when most of our teams weren't working and they were furloughed, we started to talk to them about what travel might start to look like when we start coming back. Because we kind of said to everybody, travel's going to be scary. Of course it's going to be scary. We're going to be moving into countries that have a higher risk or a higher level of COVID than we do, as well as all the usual security and the usual you know, risks that we manage when we do travel. And initially what we did was we guided everybody through and kind of said, well, this is the process that we are going to go through as a business. Like, we shared our strategic travel plan, we shared the process that we went through, and we continue to go through, and we engaged with everybody and kind of said, if you live with somebody who's vulnerable or you live with somebody who's high risk, talk to us and we will support you with quarantining, you know, in Basingstoke, or quarantining near our head office, or in, you know, in a hotel close to home, while we can get you that support. We work very closely with sports federations and sometimes with governments about getting exemptions for quarantines and things like that. And because as much as we would love to follow all of those, we can't exist if people need to sit in Ukraine for 2 weeks when they're going to be working there for 2 days. We can't do that. What we can do is give assurance that you know, our operators are behaving in, you know, a very similar way, whether they're at home or at work, and that comes into that influence element as well. We can't dictate what they do at home. You know, if they're in a tier 1 versus a tier 3 in the UK, they can do very different things. But fundamentally, we engage with our people, we use that influence, and then when we started to get really difficult conversations with people who, it didn't matter what we put in place, it didn't matter how many times we spoke to them, how many times we got them through occupational health to tell them that actually their risk of COVID is relatively low. We did end up kind of having some of those really difficult conversations of saying, this is part of your job, and we have made it as safe as we can. We have, you know, we've inserted you into the bubble, so you're going to be living on the same floor as, you know, the cricket team or the England rugby team for a little while, and won't that be lovely? And but we've got to do that. Like, that is our job. And unfortunately, if, you know, especially with furlough now, you know, any kind of furlough kind of ending now, or kind of towards the end of this month, we are kind of at that point where it's like, we'll support you as much as we can with remote work, we'll support you as much as we can with getting you back into the office and doing work like that. But fundamentally, we need you to do your job, which is you need to be an operator for us. I mean, we've had examples where we had a gentleman who was literally packing his bag to come back from Spain, having done a week's operations work in Spain, and he got a positive test, and he had to sit in a hotel room in Spain for 2 weeks. And you know, and we supported him through it. You know, he got lots of lovely treats. We made sure that room service was covered and all of that kind of thing to make it as comfortable as possible. But we spent a lot of time initially really thinking about all the different permutations of how it could work and what could happen, to kind of reassure our teams that we'd really thought about it, and that if we're asking them to get on a plane, it's because they need to get on a plane.
And I was just going to, and to that point, I think what's come through, and when I think back to kind of what sets you up successfully to help support a business through something like that, if you're a trusted source in the business, if people trust you, then you're in a place where you can advise and you can help, and people will turn, and you will have the odd person who doesn't. But actually that point where you're the trusted expert, or you've got other people that you rely on to come in because it's not your expertise and get someone in. But I think if you set yourselves up within an organisation so you are trusted, and trust is the way you're going to deliver any of this, and particularly you can't influence people if they don't trust you. And I think a lot of what I've thought about it goes back to this. Actually, you earn people's trust, and you earn that before you go into this stuff. You're in your best, most success. You've got your best, most successful teams if you've earned that trust, and then you can you play off it, and you use that because people do trust you, and they should, because you're going to do the best by them. But I think that's to the travel or to anything you're asking people to do that they feel uncomfortable with. You have to have that trust that they do trust that you're not just going to ask them to do something that you're not going to be honest about the risks associated with it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So we're just touching on the hour mark now. I know it doesn't feel like it. Time flies when we're having such fun. We do have another 30 minutes if we need it. And I think we've spoken a lot about how we've sort of been forced to change our approaches in this new world. So now let's flip it. And are there any sort of changes, especially in our uses of power or influence, that we have been forced to use, but we're now actually thinking, do you know what, this is something that I wouldn't have thought of before, and once we're in the new post-COVID world, whenever that is, I want to keep this up, or I think that this would be this is something that we continue. Ruth, is there anything on there that you'd like to?
I think so. If I think about kind of what we've done as a function in the middle of the business, we tried to be really accessible. And we've used technology to be really accessible. So we've done like online question sessions, we've done published as a staff, done videos, and really used the medium to support in people feeling they've got a connection with you. So that kind of not one-way communication. And I think this has taught us that you don't have to be in a room with someone to have a dynamic communication like that. And I think that in influencing the business, actually, I feel like we've built up more global relationships in such a short space of time than you can imagine, because you've learned how to use technology. And what you've done is you've shrunk the world. Yeah, the rules are all different, but the virus is still the same. So actually what you've done is people will feel more connected. Yes, you don't feel as close to the people you were physically in a building with, but in a global organization, you feel closer to the people on the other side of the world because it's a different time zone, but you can have two-way conversations. And I think it's really clever. And what I've learned is it's really clever what you can do if you set your mind to it. Yes, it's got shortfalls, but my God, technology that's out there is awesome, and you can build it, you can use it to build trust. Because I never really thought about it like that way before, but you can really have two-way conversations and properly build that trust. So that would be my big takeaway from all of this. And hopefully in a year's time, when we can really look back, we can go, wow, look at what we built.
Yeah. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
I think kind of building on that, and with regards to technology, thank goodness this didn't happen 5 years ago. I mean, you know, not just because, you know, we can do this, so video conferencing, all of the kind of internet technology effectively that sits there within our infrastructure. This didn't exist 5 years ago, and I think that is truly remarkable. And yeah, people's ability to use it. Yes, of course, there are differences from a demographic perspective with regards to how comfortable people feel with screen time. So there's still lots of people who say, no, I limit myself to one Zoom call a day. Congratulations, whereas I think there are other people who are quite comfortable with
I wish I could limit myself to one Zoom call a day.
It would be just one very long Zoom call, for example. But this is a case here where, so I think the technology is there, thank goodness. We've all had to learn to use it very quickly and become comfortable with it. From a business perspective, this is awesome for us because actually, depending on what the project is, the best people for the team are probably going to be one from Australia, one from Chile, and the other person from, I don't know, the north of Scotland type thing. Now, ordinarily, you would never be able to put them together in the team that's going to go and deliver a piece of work. But now you can. Yes, time zone still gets in the way, so we've got a way to go until we make the world flat. Unfortunately, it is still round, so we can't get around that particular problem. But what it means, I think, is that yes, we can work with much more exciting teams in a way. And the final thing there as well is almost coming back to well-being, is that acceptance that working from home and flexible working hours is possible, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, how many discussions have we had internally where people go, no, you have to be in 9 to 5 and you must be in the office at least these number of days per week and all of that kind of stuff. Rubbish. We can do it in other ways. And I think that actually, in a way, is we're looking at unlocking part of the workforce that we've never been able to access before. You know, so actually it means you don't need to be able to do your job during daylight hours. Actually, in terms of people who want to do part-time or kind of gig economy type things, I think there's been a massive unlocking of that potential that's going on there. So this then comes into, you know, what is the new normal? We are never going to go back to what life looked like this time last year. And actually, I think with regards to furloughing and people having to change the nature of their jobs, we need to face up to that and to do that. And there will come a huge amount of stress with that as well. But I think this is something where, and you hear lots of great stories about people almost reinventing themselves or saying, well, actually, what have I learned? What could the new normal look like for me? And I think we need to look at that as an opportunity rather than just as a threat to everything that we're doing.
Yeah, and sorry, just before moving on to you, Kelly, something that Sarah said there has actually tied in really nicely with something that one of the attendees has said. So Mark Robinson has said, in terms of influencing, it's about influencing companies and leaders to understand that 9 to 5 is not necessarily as relevant anymore. Obviously, some industries, depending on if you're delivering a service, it can alter, but we need to, like we're saying, encourage people to look after their well-being and sort of work around their lives, and where that's possible, and technology has made it more possible. What we've had to invest in due to COVID has made it more possible. So yeah, that was what Mark had said there. Kelly, what were you going to say? Thanks, Sarah.
I completely agree with everything that that Sarah and Ruth have said. Really, it's I mean, yeah, thank God for FaceTime and thank God for kind of Zoom calls and stuff like that. My nephew was born on the 23rd of March, and I didn't meet him. You know, I saw him. I got to see him through videos and stuff like that, and that's been amazing. I mean, I've delivered training across Europe with kind of interactive training slides and stuff like that, and the complexity of getting 25 people from across Europe into the UK for me to be able to deliver face-to-face training was an absolute nightmare. Whereas now I can go click, there you go, everybody can see me. It'd be really nice for you all to put your videos on so I can see everybody's faces, but right, let's get on with it and let's have that conversation that we were going to have face to face, but let's do it this way. And I'm being able, you know, the preparation that I'm having to take reduces considerably. You know, I'm using this brilliant like interactive slide thing where people can literally type a code in and they can input answers as we go. So you're getting the interactive bit that you miss, you know, that you would normally miss in a kind of traditional online learning setting. And then, you know, it's quite wonderful the way that we're now having conversations with kind of different departments within our parent company that we weren't having before. And because it's easier to get somebody on a Zoom call than it is to get somebody face to face. And working in an international business the way that we do, we were kind of used to Google Hangouts and chat and stuff like that. And now it's kind of really kind of influenced the way that we work in a much better way. It's kind of weird seeing people in the office sometimes now, actually. It's like, oh, there's 5 of you in the office. This is all too much now.
Yeah. Great. What are our thoughts? So we were talking about sort of risk perception earlier, and one of you will be able to tell me the academic term, which I have completely escapes me. But where people are more exposed to risk for a longer period of time, they become more acceptance of greater risks, for example. So have we thought about or are we thinking or discussing about potentially the other side of COVID, which I know is probably the answer is going to be no. We're just trying to keep our head above water at the moment. But where people's risk appetites may be more along the lines of, well, we've just had a global pandemic. This is not going, surely it's not going to be as bad as that. So it's then managing and influencing them after that, where they've become, everyone becomes a risk expert because they've survived a pandemic. Have we got any thoughts on that, or have we even had those discussions, or do we think that it's worth having those discussions at the moment? Ruth?
I think one of the related, and it's kind of linked and related, one of the discussions we're having is whether people are losing sight of the other risks, because everybody's all over COVID, that actually they're forgetting that in your activities you were already accepting risk or managing risk, and because everybody's eyes are over here, something over there is going to happen that you're not planning for. So in a way, because people are so focused on this risk, they forget to think about all of those. So that's one of our, it's kind of risk blindness. You've got the blinkers on because you're looking at COVID all the time, you can't see something. So that's what, and I don't know if that's a real term, risk blinkers, but we'll call it that. We'll have that, shall we? Risk blinkers. And then I think that idea that once we've got through this, we can do anything, probably could ease in. But I also think that there's really important stuff that people need to grab on from COVID, because it's a disease that is easily communicable. There's stuff we're doing that we should have been doing anyway, for flu and for norovirus and for all the stuff all over the world. And actually, we've got an opportunity. If we remember that, if we get those basics like hand washing, actually, if we did that all the time anyway, we'd all be in a much better place. I think there is a risk that people go, oh, right now, all bets are off. We've got a vaccine, we can do anything. That you then see this kind of everybody forgets everything they've ever learned. But that's part of the influencing piece, isn't it? I think it's a very specific pandemic. I think it's one of those. It's gonna be a situation that you talk about for a very long time, isn't it?
Yeah. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, so I think this is something. Are we becoming complacent? You know, with regards to our ability to manage uncertainty, etc. I mean, I agree with Ruth. I don't think we are becoming complacent, because I think this is something that just layers on top of everything else that's been going on. I mean, don't remind us, but there is this Brexit thing that's coming at us in the UK, and that hasn't gone away. We could be really cynical and say, actually, it's quite good for the government that COVID's hanging around at the moment because it's distracting all of us. And that would be a very cynical way of looking at what's going on. But I think that's a case where I'm an eternal optimist. I think actually it's a case where we are all better at managing uncertainty than we were 9 months ago, because we've had to adapt and we've had to grow and we've had to learn. Hopefully, when we come out the far side of this, because we will come out the far side of this one way or another, we can take that learning on into the future. And whether it's things like, yes, so more flexible working, or this relationship and the respect and the trust that we've built up with one another. Because I think that whilst we haven't had that personal contact with other human beings, boy, do we know one another better in a different way. I mean, how often do you invite complete strangers into your home and say, hey, look at my bookshelf, or look at what I have on the wall beside me, or yes, this is my dog, or this is a small child that's come to say hello. I mean, that never happens in normal working life, but I think actually in terms of understanding who we are and who one another are as human beings, we've had access to one another at a much deeper level than we would ordinarily do. And I think that that's a case there of, in terms of, on a personal level, understanding what we're going through, we've had a different level of understanding there. Also, people's different perceptions of risk and how we adapt to it, because we know one another in a different way. We should be able to drag that through into the future as well. And then in terms of being able to deal with a crisis, wow, are we getting better at that? I guarantee you there is going to be something in 2021 which will not go according to plan. I don't know what it is yet.
Yeah.
There's going to be something. But also, my bet would be that as a global community, we will be better at dealing with that because we've been dealing with COVID. So whilst it's not good to have to suffer a crisis in order to learn and get better at something, it is a damn good thing to come out of a situation like this as well. And it helps both on the influencing side and the power side. And the final thing to that, I think that we've had to exercise power in a much bigger way than we've had to kind of perhaps in the past. But actually we're teeing ourselves up for much better influencing skills for the long-term future. So it's almost like short-term power but also long-term influencing, all of which should hopefully have improved.
Kelly? Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, just what Sarah and Ruth have said. I mean, it really goes back to that trust thing as well. Like right now, as a profession, you know, as a health and safety and a kind of risk management profession, we are building so much trust because we are influencing, we are taking that, you know, we are using our power, and we're really directing, we're kind of helping businesses and directing businesses in what they should and shouldn't be doing right now. That actually, when this is over, God, it's got to be over soon, hasn't it? When this is over, then actually we can start to reel back that kind of power, the kind of influence of power that we've been using, and go back to that kind of influence and saying, well, actually, we've been through bigger risks and we've managed that successfully. So it's about taking the learnings from this and continuing to apply it through risk management for the, you know, for moving forward. There's so much we can learn from COVID, not from having COVID, but there's so much we can learn from this experience, from living and breathing our crisis management plans for months. They're no longer these dusty things that sit on a shelf that we look at maybe once a year and maybe run a fun exercise or anything like that. These are living, breathing documents that we are really, I think for a lot of businesses for the first time, are really looking at them and saying, actually, if we'd had a pandemic management plan, you know, if we'd had a pandemic management plan in our bag, so in our bag of tools, it wouldn't have been that easy, but it would have been potentially easier. Now we've all got a very robust pandemic plan, and you know, and that can go down to a flu outbreak, a norovirus outbreak, down to, you know, to hopefully not another global pandemic anytime soon. But having the confidence that we're coming through this crisis, and we're managing as businesses, we're managing as best as we can, gives us the confidence to be able to no other risk is, you know, all the other risks pale in comparison, but gives our operational teams the confidence that they can manage business as usual whenever that happens.
Fantastic. So we've got 14 minutes left. I think there's one more question that we'll take from the attendees, because it's a really interesting one actually, and then we'll just do some wrapping up. So thank you very much, and thank you everyone who's on the call for joining us. So the last question that we're taking is, how have the panel worked on relationship gaps between frontline workers who are out there sort of doing their work in the world, and maybe those in their organisation who have been more back office or work from home workers? Have they noticed any division or resentment from the front line to the home workers, where they might feel more vulnerable? And if so, how have you addressed it? Let's start with Sarah. Sorry.
Thank you. So I mean, I think this is something where, so my personal organisation, I mean, I think we're all frontline workers and the back office workers and everything else in between, because most of us sort of tend to work for ourselves, or we work in very small teams. And so I guess that's quite a difficult question from that perspective. However, with regards to lots of the clients that we work with, I think this has been something where, to start with, people found it very difficult because, to be honest, everybody panicked, let's face it. And there was a small team of people that went into a darkened room called the crisis management room. And everybody hoped that they might know what was going on because nobody else knew what was going on. And that's something which really impacts on the front line. So I spent a lot of time working with the mining sector. And the problem that we had there was that nobody wanted to stop the world's mines, because as soon as you stop that, then the cascade effect is quite phenomenal. But because, of course, COVID started off in China, etc., actually a lot of the world's manufacturing kind of ground to a halt anyway. So it's been really interesting watching kind of how the world's supply chains, etc., have been impacted by the global pandemic and what's been going on there. However, with regards to what's going on the front line, there's been some stuff that's been great and some stuff that's been absolutely terrible. So you see some organisations and some countries that have actually forced frontline workers to continue to work. because they need the tax money going into those countries. And that's been terrible, because I think what it does, it puts a lot of pressure on decision makers to say, how do we actually look after our members of staff? What is our duty of care with regards to this? And you've had massive tension between what governments are requesting and then a company's duty of care, where in the world you're listed, all of that kind of stuff, and just normal ethics, to be honest. Conversely, we've seen phenomenal things happening. So people building hospitals, people putting in place all kinds of bits and pieces to look after the front line, really going above and beyond, and having to make really, really, really difficult decisions. So going back to the Democratic Republic of Congo, this was a case where in a city of well over 1 million people, there were 2 ventilators, 2 for the entire, for over 1 million people, 2. So what do you do? So they just went, you know what? No one gets a ventilator, because they're not there. We can't give that to them. And that was a decision that was made in the front line, because they just couldn't do anything about it. So I think that that's something there where we've seen the most phenomenal risk-based decisions, where people have gone, what can we do here? What's actually going on? And I think that has been remarkable to see. It's then led into the kind of the ability for people to then say, okay, what do we actually need to help manage this? And that's where some of the really, really good initiatives have come through in the sector as a whole, that allows operations to carry on within their own bubble, but also then supporting the local community around about it as well. So that is a very long answer to a short question, but hopefully it does give you some insight to what some of the world's doing.
No, it's great. Thank you. Thank you. Kelly.
I knew you were going to do that. Yeah, so I mean, Hawkeye is very much kind of, we have our frontline, we have our operators, and then we have our development team, we have our kind of support services that are very much office based. And I think for us in general, there's kind of a bit of our development teams over there, and then the operational team go and do that thing over there. And it's all like, that's kind of always been the way that we've worked, really. Like our developers will go on site and they will go and interact and kind of understand how the technology they're developing is working in real life. Obviously that's kind of stopped because we want to reduce the amount of people we have on a site. There isn't really, so my short answer is there isn't really a relationship gap there for us. And I don't think my experience has been, there's not been a huge amount of kind of resentment that there are people that get to sit at home versus there are people that get to go out and, you know, sit in a hotel room instead, because it's difficult either which way. You know, there are massive difficulties being out and about and on front line, and then there are massive difficulties being stuck at home without your support networks and all of the other stuff that we're all collectively experiencing from working from home for as long. So yeah, I think that's my answer.
Yeah,
we don't
great.
really.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
Ruth, what have Holly and Phil been saying then?
They've been on air all the time, haven't they? And that's what's interesting is we've had stuff that's been literally on air all the way through live programming from the deepest, darkest lockdown through to now, and actually just really focusing on how you can do that essential work in the safest way possible, and you go back to trust, and you also allow people to say when they're worried. So you have really good conversations with medical people, you enable those conversations to have them, and you give them the respect they deserve. So if someone's worried and they feel they're vulnerable, you dig into that and you understand it more. If they live with someone who they think is vulnerable, you understand that and you look at other options and ways of doing things. And I think it goes back to, of course, in a global pandemic, if everybody's being told to stay at home and save lives, you will feel more vulnerable leaving your house, and you will want to know for sure that people are doing everything they can to look after you and your family that you go back home to. But honestly, even through this conversation, it all goes back to that trust thing, because if people trust that you are doing the right thing by them, and you genuinely are doing the right thing by them, you won't end up with that. What you'll do is you'll say, what you do is so important You do need to go out. We can stay in, but you're one of those people who need to go out. That's not about me being happy that you take that risk. It's about what you do is so important. And I think if you get that messaging right, and I think we work really hard on that, it does land. It really does land. And I think, yeah, it's still going to be hard. When people are leaving the house, the government are saying don't go out. I can imagine what it feels like to be the person who's actually got to leave your house. You still go, hang on a minute, this feels a little counterintuitive, and I'm not the NHS.
Yeah,
There's
and especially
so
if
much
you,
about that.
especially if you're being told to do that for work and then you're not allowed to do that in your social life. I think that we've had lots of management discussions around that, where we have frontline service delivery workers who have it's essential because they're providing support to people that they've had to go out, but then they can't go and see their parents who live 10 minutes down the road on an evening or at the weekend. So we've had lots of conversations and support conversations around that. And again, similar to what you've been saying there, Ruth, it's people understand why they're being asked. It doesn't mean they're happy about it, but they understand it, and it's then just about supporting them through to even if you can't be happy about it, it's about being comfortable with it. Those are the conversations we've been having as well. Yeah. Great, thank you very much. So what I will sort of a one sentence finisher, if we're happy. So where we were sort of when we did this session before, I think we sort of agreed that it was going to be the influence versus power was about 70 or 80% influence and 20 or 30% power. We saw as useful, or the way that we were managing organizations. Just very quickly, whistle stop around the screen, where would you say that balance is now in terms of the pandemic? And if you want to put your neck out there, where do you think that will be when we get out the other side? So we'll start with, who's gone? I was seeing who looked most panicked then. No, that's fine. We'll start with Sarah. You're smiling. Sarah, where do you think?
That'll learn me. Okay, so if we were 70% influence, 30% power before we came into the pandemic, I think we're about 50-50 now. But when we come out the other side, I think it's reverting back to that 70-30 in terms of the comfortable split would be my bet.
Thank you. Kelly?
I was going to say 50-50 as well. It's definitely kind of at that level for me. And I would very much like to see it go back to that kind of 70-30 split. I think the way that we were working before was wonderful, and the way that, you know, we were all very much in agreement that it is very much more about influence rather than our power. I can't wait to go back to that.
I can't wait. I can't wait to not be asked if I'm allowed to do something, because that's not the world I live in. And that I would agree. I think it might have even gone a bit further at the very beginning than 50-50. I think it's gone one way and it's started to come back, and then hopefully go back to the other thing. And the one thing I would say is one of the things that's really resonated with me through all of this is on a podcast that Todd Conklin did at the very beginning of this. He said people's attention is earned, not owed. And I thought, we'll come out of this and we'll have earned so much attention. We need to not waste that. And that was, it's really stuck with me all the way through. I've been thinking, oh my God, what are we earning? Because you've got to believe there's something in it at the other end.
Yeah. Great, thank you very much. Well, in that case, I think that's, unless anyone else has anything that they want to add, I think that's, thank you very much for your time and for your insights. To those of you who have joined, thank you very much as well. Suzanne, I think, is there anything that you would like to say at the end as a wrap up?
Hi, Tom. I just want to say thank you to all the speakers, Kelly, Sarah, Ruth, and yourself. And I hope everybody has found the webinar sourceful, because I found it really interesting as well. And we hope to see you all again in the future. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you as well, Tom, for being a great host.
Yes.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.